"Underestimate humans at your peril," the old alien said with a rough voice. He stared at the young soldiers in front of him, his eyes reflecting a mix of regret and something darker. They were listening, but none of them believed him. How could they? The commanders had always said the same thing. Humans were primitive, weak, and easy prey for the superior races of the galaxy. No one had seen a human in action for over a century. They had all been wiped out during the last war or so, they thought. But the old alien had seen them. He had witnessed their strength, and he knew that the commanders were wrong. "You know nothing," he muttered to himself as memories flooded back. Lutara was the first to sense it. The sudden weight in the air, the oppressive silence that had fallen over the battlefield. The invading forces had arrived on this remote outpost in the outer rim. They weren't here to negotiate. They had come to conquer. Lutara, a veteran of countless wars, scanned the horizon. The ground beneath him was littered with the remnants of their last skirmish, and now it was eerily still. Something felt off. "They're here," Lutara muttered. "Let's see what we're dealing with." The enemy forces were a mix of bioengineered creatures and advanced war machines. The Zalcorians had coordinated them with the precision only their species could achieve. Lutara had fought them before, but this time he felt uneasy. His instincts screamed that something was different. "We've got incoming," Koro, his second-in-command, shouted. His voice was tense, strained with the weight of what was coming. The enemy had no doubt located the weak point in their perimeter. "Hold your ground," Lutara commanded. He rallied the squad, urging them to stand firm. His body was older, his reflexes slower, but his mind was sharp, too sharp for the Zalcorians to know what was about to happen. The sound of heavy footsteps filled the air, accompanied by the shrill calls of the Zalcorian commanders. Lutara's adrenaline surged. He was ready. But then something happened that he had not expected. A human appeared on the battlefield. Barely a silhouette against the smoke-filled sky, the human sprinted across the field. No armor, no visible weapons, just one man running toward the enemy. The Zalcorians froze. There was an unsettling silence. One heartbeat, then another. "What in the seven hells is that?" Koro growled. Lutara's voice, almost filled with fear, responded, "That's a human." The human didn't hesitate. He crouched low, his eyes scanning the surroundings, taking in everything at once. He didn't wait for orders. He moved as if he already knew where the weak points in the enemy's formation were. The Zalcorians had never seen anything like it. There was no protocol, no strategy, just pure instinct. A single shot rang out, and one of the enemy's heavy units exploded in a cloud of debris. The human kept moving, disappearing into the shadows. He was too quick, too elusive for the enemy to track. Another shot, another explosion. The enemy leader, a massive brute with armored skin, bellowed orders. But it was already too late. The human was on them, right in the heart of their forces. The Zalcorians didn't know how to react. "Get back!" Lutara shouted, his voice snapping him out of his stupor. "We need to regroup." But it was pointless. The human didn't need any backup. Unlike the Zalcorians, who followed orders without question, this human was operating on pure instinct, using the terrain, his body, and his mind to wreak havoc. Lutara and his squad watched in stunned silence as the human systematically took down one enemy after another. There was no mercy in his movements. He used the environment to his advantage, striking when and where it hurt the most. The Zalcorians had never faced anything like it before. Their highly coordinated attack began to falter as the human turned the battlefield into his own hunting ground. The old alien's words echoed in Lutara's mind. "Underestimate humans at your peril." Lutara realized then just how true those words were. Under enemy fire, scaling walls and tossing grenades with deadly accuracy, the human moved with relentless focus. His face betrayed no fear, no hesitation. The Zalcorians were losing control. Their battle plans were ineffective against the unpredictable and wild nature of the human combatant. "Fall back," Lutara ordered again. It wasn't just the battle that unnerved him. It was the realization that humans didn't fight like everyone else. They fought to win. The once impenetrable fortress of the Exile Quran heavy unit was now in disarray. Amid the chaos, the human advanced, pushing further through the ranks and taking down their strongest forces with terrifying efficiency. "This isn't happening," Koro muttered in disbelief. But Lutara couldn't deny the truth. He had heard the old stories. Stories no one had believed. He had heard of humans, of their resourcefulness, their adaptability, and how they fought in ways no one expected. And now, standing on this battlefield, Lutara realized those stories had been true. Humans were dangerous in ways no one had prepared for. Lutara gritted his teeth. This wasn't how it was supposed to go. The Zalcorians had superior forces, advanced technology, and experience. Yet here was a single human turning the tide of battle. This was the first mistake, the first underestimation, and it was already too late. "What do you think happened?" one of the young aliens asked, a hint of doubt creeping into his voice. The old alien's eyes narrowed as he stared into the distance. The memory of that day was still fresh in his mind. "I think," he said slowly, "they learned the hard way that humans aren't just another species you can wipe out. They are something else entirely." The young ones didn't understand, not yet, but they would. All it took was one encounter with a human to learn what the rest of the galaxy had failed to grasp for centuries. Never underestimate them. The tension on the battlefield had only grown thicker. Lutara's breath was shallow, his pulse rapid. They were pinned down now, the Exile Coran forces retreating into a defensive perimeter. But Lutara could still feel the human's presence, even without seeing him. That terrifying feeling that things were about to go from bad to worse. Koro, his second in command, crouched next to him, eyes scanning the battlefield. "Lutara, this isn't a fight anymore. This is slaughter." "Yeah," Lutara muttered, eyes locked on the shifting smoke in the distance. "And we're on the losing side of it." The human hadn't stopped. He kept going, tearing apart their forces with a calm, calculated madness that defied everything the Zalcorians thought they knew about combat. The way he moved, the way he fought, it was something else. A chaotic brilliance that shouldn't belong to a species as primitive as humans. Lutara snapped to attention as the human's figure flashed across the battlefield again, just a blur against the dark sky. "Don't let him get close," Lutara warned, though there was no real confidence in his voice anymore. The doubt had already started creeping in. The realization had settled in that the squad never stood a chance from the start. They had miscalculated. They all had. And then, just like that, the human was upon them. Lutara had expected a full-on assault, guns blazing, overwhelming force. But this was different. The human didn't even bother with gunfire. He was too fast for that. The instant he was within range, he dove straight into the Zalcorians' ranks. He spun, ducked, and sliced through the enemy forces as if they weren't even there. Lutara's squad fired, but the human was already gone, slipping between their shots, always one step ahead. Then came the sickening crunch of something important. Breaking. The flash of a grenade detonation as it hit the Exile Quran stronghold from within. It was a blind hit, yet the timing was perfect. The Zalcorians were faltering now. Their troops, once organized, were disintegrating into a frantic mess. The human didn't hesitate. He didn't pause for breath. "He's not even trying to survive," Koro muttered, his voice rising with alarm. "He's not even afraid of death." Lutara couldn't reply. It was true. The human fought not just like a soldier, but like an entire army, thinking 10 steps ahead and exploiting every single weakness in the Exile Koran formation. At that moment, Lutara saw something that made his heart lurch. A rock slide, caused by a stray explosion, sent massive chunks of debris tumbling toward the human. The debris should have crushed anything in its path. It should have worked. It had to work. But the human didn't flinch. Instead, he moved faster than a heartbeat, diving toward the falling rubble. He grabbed hold of an overturned piece of metal, using it as a shield. His body absorbed the shock, but not the impact. He rolled with it. In that split second, Lutara realized it wasn't an accident. The human had planned it, anticipated it, and adjusted his movement accordingly. It was like watching a storm take shape, unpredictable, but with purpose. And that realization, that dreadful understanding, hit Lutara like a hammer blow to the chest. "We can't keep up with him," Lutara whispered. "He knows everything, every move before it happens." Koro's face paled. "What the hell do we do now? We're getting slaughtered!" Lutara gripped his weapon tighter, scanning the terrain. The situation was dire. The Zalkorians were stumbling, disoriented. It was clear they weren't going to last much longer. "We fight!" Lutara growled, his mind already working with a desperate last-ditch plan. "We fight until there's nothing left to fight for." He turned to Koro, determination in his voice. "We need to take him down. We have one shot at this. Just one." Koro nodded, his face grim. "Possible?" Lutara's eyes narrowed. "It won't be easy. He's too fast, too smart," Lutara replied. "But we have the terrain on our side. He thinks he's in control. Let's see how he reacts when he's cornered." They scrambled to set the trap, a complex sequence of explosive charges, falling rocks, and concealed weapons. If they could isolate the human, separate him from the rest of the battlefield, maybe, just maybe, they could end this. Lutara barked orders to his squad, but the seconds ticked by in a blur. Every minute, every second they delayed, the human closed in on them again. He was like a force of nature, an unstoppable tide, and Lutara began to wonder if they had made a grave mistake. Should they have stayed out of the fight altogether? Then the human appeared. He moved like a ghost through the haze, and for a brief moment his eyes met Lutara's. There was a flicker of recognition in his gaze. Lutara's heart skipped a beat. The human knew what was coming. Lutara shouted orders. The ground beneath. Their feet shook as the traps triggered. Explosions ripped through the earth, sending clouds of dirt and fire into the air. A massive rock slide crashed down, obliterating the Zalkorian defenses. But the human wasn't caught in the explosion. He had already leapt from the edge of the cliffside, moving faster than Lutara could process. Lutara's stomach dropped. This wasn't happening. He had planned everything, but the human had anticipated every move. And in that moment, Lutara understood. It wasn't that humans were clever. It was that they were something else entirely. "Well," the old alien's voice broke the silence, pulling the young ones out of their rapt attention. "What happened?" The young aliens exchanged confused looks. "But how?" The old alien exhaled a long breath. "Let's just say that at that moment the Exile Koran realized what they were up against. But it was too late. They had already underestimated the one thing they should never have. The human. Unstoppable." Lutara realized the truth only when it was too late. The battlefield had turned into a maze of explosions, chaos, and confusion. The Zalkorian forces were shattered, crumbling under the humans' assault like a castle of sand struck by a tidal wave. Every move, every action the human made was a nightmare of efficiency. The chaos was his element. It wasn't just skill, it was something deeper, more primal. There was a cold, calculating unpredictability to him, a sense that he was always 2 steps ahead. The Zalkorians never stood a chance. Lutara watched helplessly as his squad scrambled to escape the crossfire. He felt the ground tremble beneath his feet as the human, the one they had all dismissed, drove deeper into the heart of the Zalcorian ranks. There was no plan left now, only pure survival. Koro gripped his weapon tighter, staring at the battlefield. "We're done. He's not even fighting the same battle we are." "Yeah," Lutara said grimly, "and we're not the ones he's hunting anymore." The human had become something more than just a soldier. He was a force of nature, something beyond their understanding. The exile Koreans couldn't adapt fast enough, couldn't predict the chaos he unleashed. They were scrambling, retreating, trying to regroup. Lutara's instincts kicked in. The squad had to get out. The ground shifted beneath them. A violent explosion erupted nearby, rocking the earth. Dust and smoke billowed into the air as the force of the blast threw them off their feet. Lutara's vision blurred for a moment, but he quickly regained focus, eyes darting to Koro. "Get up!" Lutara shouted, his voice cutting through the chaos. But Koro didn't move. He was staring at something. Lutara followed his gaze, and there, standing in the middle of the destruction, was the human. The same man who had torn through their ranks with terrifying precision. The Zalcorian forces were in disarray, and the same figure who had turned. The tide of the battle now stood alone in the chaos, surveying the wreckage. His chest heaved with every breath, but there was no sign of fear or hesitation, just pure focus. Lutara's heart raced. "Koro, move!" Lutara shouted. But Koro didn't respond. He just stared at the human, his face pale. Lutara grabbed him by the arm and yanked him to his feet. "Move, damn it! He's coming for us!" But it was too late. The human was already on the move, his eyes locking onto them from across the battlefield. There was no more hesitation. The Zalcorians were finished. Lutara's squad was next. The human moved quickly. Too quickly. Lutara didn't have time to aim his weapon before the human was already on top of them, a blur of motion. Koro fired, but the shot missed by miles. The human didn't even try to dodge, they were just too slow. In one fluid motion, the human closed the distance, grabbing Koro by the arm and twisting, sending him sprawling to the ground. Lutara opened fire, but his weapon jammed. Cursing, he threw it aside and drew a combat knife. The human didn't flinch. In fact, he didn't even seem to notice. He was focused on Koro, who was struggling to get back up. Lutara lunged, desperate, but he was too slow, too predictable. The human caught his wrist mid-strike, stopping the blade just inches from his chest. Lutara's heart thudded in his chest as the human's cold, calculating gaze met his. "You shouldn't be here," the human said, his voice rough but oddly calm. Lutara couldn't reply. He couldn't process the words. His mind was racing, trying to comprehend what was happening. How was this human, this man, doing all of this? How was he so effective? The human twisted Lutara's wrist, forcing him to drop the knife. Lutara felt his breath catch in his throat as the human stood over him, his power overwhelming. "Not everyone has the luxury of underestimating you," the human said softly, almost to himself. Then, without warning, he dropped Koro to the ground, his expression unreadable. Lutara's mind snapped back into focus. "You're not the human," he muttered. The human paused, his head tilting slightly. "No," he replied. "I'm not." Lutara had expected a fight, but instead, the human stopped. Why? Lutara's pulse quickened, and panic began to creep in. "What do you want? What are you doing here?" The human glanced around, his eyes scanning the battlefield. "Just finishing what was started," he said. "But you didn't need to be part of it. The Zalcorians were never your problem." Lutara stood there for a moment, processing the words. There was no anger in the human's voice. "Why did you do it?" Lutara demanded, struggling to find the right words. "You're just one man. You shouldn't even be here, not with all this firepower. It doesn't make sense." The human gave a short laugh, a sound that lacked humor. Humans don't do things the way the galaxy expects them to, he said. You've made the mistake of thinking we follow the same rules as everyone else. But we don't. Not anymore. You just haven't learned it yet. Lutara's chest tightened, the realization hitting him like a freight train. This wasn't just a battle. It was a war. A war that had been going on for centuries, and the exile Koran had lost before they even understood what was happening. The human had never needed to follow their rules. He had created his own. The human turned to leave, walking away without another word. Lutara stood there, his mind racing. He couldn't comprehend what had just happened. He couldn't even begin to process the magnitude of it all. The galaxy's rules were shattered. The Zalcorians had been humbled, and it was because of one human. The squad remained silent. Even Koro, who had been knocked down, said nothing. They just watched as the human disappeared into the horizon, and Lutara realized with a sickening certainty that they would never forget this moment. They would never forget him. The old alien leaned back, his face unreadable as he watched the young ones absorb the story. The silence stretched between them, taut and heavy. Finally, one of the young ones spoke. "So that's it?" he asked, disbelief creeping into his voice. "They never stood a chance?" The old alien nodded slowly. "No, they never did." He paused, his eyes darkened by a memory long buried. "Don't forget that. If you ever come across one, remember the story, because underestimating them isn't just a mistake, it's a death sentence."